Hey there, welcome to episode 147 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. I am the managing director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, a Nevada nonprofit corporation, a 501c3 public charity. Our purpose is to enable and encourage ideation, innovation, and implementation to make our communities better. You'll notice I did not say with code. There's more to life than coding, trust me. Today's title and topic, the 2025 year-end Misc. That's short for miscellaneous. On this Tuesday, December 9th, 2025, we're recording this at 9:26 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here in Greater Vegas. We normally publish these episodes on Tuesdays, so I think we're going to make it. If you're not familiar with the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program or the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, well, let me tell you. This audio program would ideally have a conversation now and then, but it's mostly to talk about what we're trying to accomplish, how we're trying to accomplish it, particular initiatives or component projects, or how we're trying to do some things, or how we're reaching out to other organizations to collaborate, the state of affairs with finding people to collaborate with, to find civic volunteers and so on. So a little bit of everything each week on Tuesdays. In fact, so today, as the end of the calendar year approaches, and as I've already said, we're going to start shifting to more, and I'm going to end on this too. Here's what we have done, here's what we're working on, and here's what we've done. Not here's what we're going to work on, and here's what we hope to accomplish. So hopefully, it'll be a little bit more status, less aspiration. Nothing wrong with aspiration, but we gotta do. Try not. As a small green person once said. That was Frank Oz. So, we're a nonprofit corporation here in Nevada, and we got our work cut out for us. So let's get some audio done, and we can get back to work. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a summary, which is one sentence today, which I'll read. Our two usual links. Hopefully some of the things I'm talking about today will appear at those links, but the two usual links as we've had for the past few weeks. So you'll always know where to find us. On that note, let me get started so we can get finished, and that's how it works. The summary of today's episode: as this calendar year draws to a close during the civic volunteer winter, the time is right to catch up on some of those less shiny to-do items on the list. The links for today's episode, as I mentioned, as usual, innovateforvegas.org, Innovate F-O-R Vegas, no spaces or punctuation, Innovate for Vegas, F-O-R Vegas, period, O-R-G. That is our original new website. It used to be codeforvegas.org. That's a story I've told many times. Innovateforvegas.org, that's where you'll find our main initiative and component project repositories. The site is hosted as a GitHub Pages website in a repository on GitHub in our GitHub organization, Innovate for Vegas. So there you go. All ready to go. If anyone's curious, you can start there. Innovate for Vegas Foundation, that's same spelling, Innovate for Vegas, Innovate F-O-R Vegas, period. And then the word foundation spelled out. So here's the deal. We are a Nevada nonprofit corporation, so we're like an actual business. We have a board of directors with a couple of empty seats, by the way, still. We have governance, we have bylaws, we have bank accounts, we can accept donations as a tax-exempt 501c3, so if anyone donates money, they can talk to a tax professional about possibly writing it off their own taxes. So we're 501c3, we're a nonprofit, we are in good standing with everybody as far as I'm aware. That's the sort of thing that we intend to have if it's not, some things are not there yet, but we'll get to that during today's episode. But that's why that website exists. Essentially, if you're visiting innovateforvegas.org, you will find the fun things that we're working on. If you're looking for 990 filing history, which I have to update on there, I have to push all that stuff there. We're in our fourth year, so we've finished filing our postcard 990s. Maybe this year will be more interesting. We'll find out. But donations and who's on our board and a bylaws repository to keep track of any changes we make. And so those are always visible. So just a way to keep everything that's more businessy in a place that's accessible to anyone who's looking for it on a website and in a separate GitHub organization, Innovate for Vegas FDN, I think. So I think that's linked from the homepage. So you can visit either of those sites, innovateforvegas.org, innovateforvegas.foundation. And as I will describe, both are in need of some attention. Everything that we have is indeed in the same state of affairs. So let's get started with the actual show on some per repo images. Repo, short for repository. Think of a repository as a folder on your computer, a directory, where everything in that directory can be changed and rolled back, like Wikipedia almost, but a little bit more going on than that. So here's the deal. I don't see too many people taking advantage of this at large. I mean, I haven't sampled anywhere near the entire GitHub population to make that a statistically significant statement. But GitHub does support adding an image to each repository that is displayed in the Open Graph metadata if a link to the repository is shared. So if I post a link on, probably not on Twitter, but Twitter, Blue Sky, a Mastodon website, LinkedIn, a number of other places, the process includes going and checking the metadata, the meta tags and the HTML for the link that I'm sharing. And so you can have a title and an image and a link and a description. That's the sort of the minimal metadata for Open Graph. And so you can actually load up an image. Otherwise, you get a fairly generic GitHub organization / repository name. Kind of boring. And so I've been thinking, we should have images that sort of reflect what the individual repositories are about, or really more the initiative that a particular repository is a part of. Somebody's doing some gasoline-powered gardening outside. I might pause until they pass. So if there's an abrupt cut, because I may or may not remember exactly which thought I was expressing. Anyway, enough about that. So I don't really see too many people doing this. When you see a GitHub link, you normally just see that standard GitHub image. So since we are going to move to a more here's where we are in this particular component project, social media outreach strategy, and since such outreach usually grabs more attention with a visual cue of some sort in the form of an attention-getting and relevant repository image, or image in general, with appropriate text and iconography to indicate the repo name, the normal name. So there's the repo name specifically in the URL, and then there's the, what is this? And what sort of a thing it is, not to mention our logo stamp on there. The image per repository is visible when sharing the repository link, but can also be included in the GitHub pages HTML that we are currently using in a fairly minimal way. So getting this item implemented and including the image on relevant HTML web pages, one per repository, most likely, but more for people and not for GitHub users. So just to make it a little bit more stylized, a little bit less, GitHub pages all pretty much look the same for the most part. List of files, modified, etc. So we can be a little bit more creative on our GitHub pages, and we can include a repo image there too, and it'll be the same image. So consistency and all that good stuff. So putting that on there would be on our activity site at least, possibly on the foundation site, if people are curious what we're working on. And maybe at least the top level initiative repository and not the entire collection of component projects. Anyway, it would make a lot of sense. So that's something I have a template for the what do they call it? Is it relief? The relief border, the margins, I guess, like a 40 pixel border around the edge. So getting started on that. I have one sort of a tester. I'm going to see what it looks like when I post it on there. Anyway, work in progress. We have a few repositories, nothing like, we will have a lot more. So I'd like to make this as easy as possible to generate and and post and include on GitHub pages, templates, and all that stuff. So that's a thing. That's a thing I've been meaning to do for a while. It's the end of the year. Why not? Now's the time. Speaking of our logo, that has always been a work in progress, except for the progress part. If you happen to take a look at it, you will note that there is some room for additional hexagonal tiles in the center section of the overall seal layout. So it's a pretty straightforward notion. Hexagons are very popular as badges and whatnot in the world in general. So using a hexagonal layout for these little tiles made some sense back when I first created this. And it was partially left open, the free space in the sort of the lower right section of the inside of the seal, with the intention to make the one logo work for both Code for and Create for versions of our public website. So just like we have Foundation and org websites, the idea was to have innovateforvegas.org and then codefor.vegas and createfor.vegas. And we actually had those domains and we dumped them. Now we just have the for website. But as part of the forking effort, we were going, because people were saying, I'm not a coder, am I not welcome? And that's not at all the case. So we figured we could try appealing to creative people, and Code for, Create for, that was like arbitrary, but seems useful. Like, I'm not a coder, but are you a creative person? Do you want to try to work on something from a different angle kind of thing? But these were designed to be more inclusive of non-coders in general. So that was the idea. So when we were transitioning from Code for Vegas, codeforvegas.org, to Innovate for Vegas, we were going to hang on to the Code for legacy of sorts, and then the Create for, and then have those as the public facing, the equivalent of the activity website, and then we would go from there. But now we have Innovate for Vegas, so we don't really have the Code for problem. And we also, I think I'll mention it if I don't have it here already. The empty spaces would thus be filled with the appropriate elements, which were TBD at the time. And we're talking like 2.5 years ago now, I think. Once our name change was complete, and when we transitioned from the Code for and Create for domains to a single for domain, so we own for.vegas, so we can do a subdomain, and it can be Code for, Create for, or create.for, code.for. We can do whatever we want. One of the ideas to actually pursue would be volunteer.for.vegas. I think somebody already owned volunteer.vegas, but that makes sense. A little for with options. So this enables us to broaden the range of possibilities that we want to have websites for. But that was left dangling. So our logo has sort of been in limbo, kind of stuck there. So I need to revisit that with my limited graphical abilities, but my newfound familiarity with PenPot, which I talked about in a previous episode recently, and with the open source Inkscape application, both of which work well with SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics, with which our logo is formed. And I actually used Inkscape to create the logo as you have seen it up until now. It'll probably be like that for a little while longer. And then another lingering issue, which I think I need to address from an ethical standpoint in general, is the use of a part of the OSI, the Open Source Initiative logo. It looks like a keyhole. It's like a keyhole, but it's like a donut with a bite taken out of it. No, it's like a section, like a pie chart, but with a section missing, kind of with a hollow center hole. Anyway, if you don't know what it looks like, then don't worry about it. But we definitely, for the open source tile, because that is one of that's a thing that we focus on entirely, open source. So that's not their official trademarked logo, registered trademark, I believe. They do have like a brand guideline, style guide, which that does not necessarily follow, but their logo, the partial part, is available as a scalable vector graphic or PNG, portable network graphic, or in other forms all over the place. So I'm not entirely sure that they enforce, like if they would come after a fellow open source nonprofit. We're not really using it in a flagrant way. We're not trying to identify ourselves as them, etc. But if we do want to print some stickers or t-shirts or anything like that, or if we get if we blow up and become really popular, I don't want somebody saying, "Hey, you're kind of infringing on their trademark here." So, and to add to that, that is the open source initiative logo for software. There's a similar open source hardware logo that makes the partial circular or disc-like part more of a gear that's partial. There are a few different logos floating around for open source food and some other open source stuff. So I figured, we don't want to have just open source software, open source hardware. So I actually started prototyping a little, like, our own take on open source everything, open source documentation, open source hardware, mechanical, open source software, content, whatever it is. So something a little bit more unusual, perhaps. Some of the other icons that are on the tiles in our logo now are also invented to represent inclusivity and diversity and ideation, innovation, implementation. So, what is there a universal icon for each of those? Sort of, but not really. Accessibility was kind of a blend of two different kinds of accessibility. So it's possible. We can do whatever we want. So yeah, it's an open source software logo as it stands. That's not awful, but I figured, if we're going to tune it up a little bit, the logo itself is an SVG composite. I can't remember what the term is for that, but it's multiple SVG files that are combined to make the entire logo. The idea there is to make it stylable. So right now it's black and white. It's actually black with no background. So converting into a PNG, it's black on white. That's very boring. But the idea is, and most web browsers, I think all of them at this point, support not only displaying SVG files in SVG images or objects, maybe. There's a couple different ways to embed scalable vector graphics into a web page, and you can apply style sheets to them. So the idea was, we can keep our logo in this sort of mask version, and then if there's a Las Vegas Raiders or Las Vegas Golden Knights thing, holidays or whatever, we could change the color scheme and the overall theme to match something, right? Calendar, events, whatever it is. So fairly flexible. SVG is very cool. You don't have to worry about scaling artifacts. It's a vector format. So a lot of cool stuff there. And so I just need to tighten it up a little bit, make sure everything's lined up correctly, registration slightly off. If you were to zoom in on our logo, you would see that some of the hexagon outlines are not totally aligned properly. They're off by like maybe 1 pixel. I think it's like 1 pixel in 2 cases. Anyway, so yeah, the logo has been needing some attention, and I am not a logo designer or graphic artist, so hack together. Don't forget our public websites, which I referred to already. I mentioned the 2 main sites, and we also have our sandbox site and the dev site to work on. All of them need a refresh, and maybe they don't need to all look the same, like they're all essentially identical. Having a common theme is fine, but they should differentiate a little bit so you know which website you're on, or have some idea that you're not on the other website. Based on the purpose of each, the foundation website could be a little bit more boring, the business-like. And then the .org website could be a little bit more like civic volunteer oriented, more pictures of people. I've always liked, what is it called? Cover flow, to represent icons or other representation, visualization of the different projects and so on. So we'll come up with something that's a little bit more fun, I guess. But yeah, so those 2 sites need a little refresh anyway. Updating some of the items, adding our bylaws to the foundation website, for example, and all that other stuff. So there's just some housekeeping to do there. The sandbox site is actually a little bit different, since it serves 2 main purposes and maybe others. One is a work area to try out repository manipulation. For example, I have some repository management automation ideas that I would like to be able to test without messing up our main activity organization on GitHub. So the sandbox will work for this. And then the other purpose is a place to fork other repositories as needed from other organizations, other places. This is not strictly necessary, but if we need to fork a repository from some other organization, their licensing and other elements may not, and in fact are unlikely to fit in with what will be all of our repositories as we implement Agile for Volunteers, for example, with our standard labeling scheme across all repositories and so on, a common code of conduct and contributing document that would apply to all of them. So a forked repository would have its own version of those things. So it wouldn't make sense to say everything except this one. So the sandbox allows us to say, well, okay, anything in the sandbox is sort of a different, could be anything, a more heterogeneous mixture of repositories and possibly licenses, policies, etc. But we can still keep track of them and include them in multi-repository builds if we want to pull or clone as needed, etc., etc. So and our Agile for Volunteers project scheme has plan and task issues, templates for those, and pull requests, discussions, tags, and so on. So some of those things won't by default be possibly compatible, or at least they won't be similar. So, and then the project act data for our stuff, we wouldn't, if we copied their stuff, it should point to them. So we want to make sure that we don't intermingle. Well, anyway, keep everything straight. And this may be overkill to be concerned about this, but either way, we have the sandbox entirely for this very reason, to try out ideas. And by the way, they probably will have their own GitHub Pages scheme on a different branch usually. So do we want to implement a Pages template scheme for this forked version? Or is the sandbox going to be a little bit more sparse when it comes to that? Because our main focus is on our projects, but we still, we want to be aware and respect the policies and the contributing policies and the code of conduct to some extent. But merely having the repository doesn't get affected by that too much. But if somebody were to say, oh, they forked the Python language, I don't know, I just made that up. Oh, they forked the Python language. Oh, what if I want to contribute to their thing? Well, it's not ours. So if you visit the sandbox site, you're not visiting our formal sort of home base for our activities, our initiatives and component projects and all. You're visiting a fork of something else. So, and that is clear. It's not easy to confuse those, but administratively and from a sort of default expectation standpoint, we have our sandbox. That's one reason. Not a big deal. And then there's the dev site. So innovateforvegas.dev, DEV, like develop. This site is a longer story. It's not really on the to-do list right now. It's on the, blue sky for early next year. At the moment, because there's only just me working on this stuff, we don't really need the dev site. But the underlying infrastructure as code stuff would figure into that. And that is something on the to-do list, mostly for deploying our social media endeavor as part of our overall Smarter Smart City and information sharing and so on. The dev site will be the home of our self-hosted tooling, and that's a collection of things, which will likely be a topic of discussion again in a future episode. I have spoken about this during our office hours meetups, but it is still a vague planning stage item at the moment. But imagine this wouldn't be a static website that would be hosted on GitHub Pages. It would be deploying our own open source version of GitHub. It's called ForgeJo. That's not our project, but we could fork that and then use that if we need to modify anything for whatever that would entail. We could possibly look at integrating Agile for Volunteers, for example, but generally speaking, we would deploy the ForgeJo project on our dev server to be able to have local web-based repository management, and we would stick with our Git, and we could have multiple upstreams and all that, so that it would work out nicely. An Excalibur self-hosted instance, maybe other tools like that. Penpot, some others. So let's see, where are we? I've talked about this during our office hours and our initiative meetups, and that's all I'll say about that right now. A lot of ideas, but we don't need to scale that out for one person yet, so we don't have to worry about cloud hosting and all that at the moment, but we should be ready for it. Our public engagement is high on the list. We have a Blue Sky account and a Fossidon account and the LinkedIn account, the page. The page is managed by our media account, which is, it's not mine. So we have a separate, in case we ever have a brand manager, we're all set. So we don't have to say, oh, I got to log in as me. So all that is already taken care of. So for our LinkedIn presence, which we don't really get much response. We have, as I'm speaking right now, I think we have 830 people following our page and nearly zero interaction, essentially zero. So the return on investment of time, but it is a point of reference for some people. So we're going to switch over to just similar to what I already mentioned. We'll post more information about what we have done rather than what we are doing. Fewer podcast links, because if people really want to listen to a podcast, they can subscribe to it. So posting links on our LinkedIn page is not totally useful. The imagery, the cover art might be eye-catching, so that's okay, but not totally worthwhile. So more, here's what we have done. Here's what we're, check this out kind of thing. And here's where those graphics per repository will come in handy, because we can actually have a colorful image that illustrates what it is we are, the nature of a particular repository. Hey, check this out. We have a demo version, whatever it is, right? So that all kind of fits into there. We have our YouTube channel, of course, which you may have found this audio program there, along with Spotify and Amazon and Apple, of course. There's maybe more by now, so those are yet more accounts or presences to deal with. And obviously, this audio program ongoing itself, and we could add a video discussion or conversation element around some of our initiatives and the people we interact with in our world, out in the world, I should say. So anything is possible. And so if there's video, and then the audio could also appear not only on YouTube, but on maybe a federated PeerTube instance, or who knows, anything is possible. So part of our Apex initiative, and I used to call that the capstone, but too many people in the education space are like, capstone? That's not what that is. So they were really focused on an education pathway and a capstone project at the end of a curriculum or whatever. So I said, all right, well, what we're looking for is more of an umbrella under which various initiatives would fit. So the Apex initiative contains other initiatives that can each stand alone, but they all kind of interoperate. So if we have a unified Apex initiative goal, Smarter Smart City, and then we do things like Smart Social, which is, connecting data and people at city scale. So it's not social networking or social media, it's the actual connection part. And then we have MuniBits and Welcome, and we have Open Data Capture Platform, and we have Open Transit for getting around, and there might be others. So we can put all that under that Apex initiative, and then we can talk about that. And it does include modern information sharing work, which would likely couple some of the old ways and the new ways. And as long as we are thinking, how do we engage with the public, and we're building an infrastructure to do exactly that using modern and legacy technologies, then our own public engagement will, of course, need to take advantage of our own efforts. And spoiler alert, it will. If I could speak. Thinking about this now for the future makes sense. That's how engineering works. And that is what has already been happening. So good for us. Eventually, we will eat our own dog food, as the saying goes. If I'll tell you this, when I worked at Netscape a long time ago, all activities internal, like if you had to expense something, if you had to submit an expense report, if you had to submit, if you had to take a survey from HR, or if you had anything you were doing, you were using a web browser and you were interacting with a Netscape web server to enable some sort of a service per department. So it wasn't like, oh yes, we work at Netscape or we're using some Microsoft products. So that's called eating your own dog food. So we should be doing that and maintain our primary point of publication that can be the source of our information sharing to other platforms in other places, but also including our own, which I call MuniBits or MyMuni. I call it MyMuni, but the the generic external platform name would be Munibits. So we should be able to use Munibits and publish to other Munibits platforms. Think federated, decentralized, and go from there. Purpose-built. We might have a mailing list server that may figure in there somewhere. We could take advantage of direct mailing with links back to our own content. We don't have to link to a LinkedIn page, article. Certainly we're not going to be linking to Facebook or Instagram or silliness like that. So we would be linking, if we had a mailing list server, the messages going out would be linking back to properties that we own or control. We don't have to link to third parties and deal with their siloing and artificial intelligence, feed generation, and all kinds of other chaos. I don't think I've talked about it here, but I'm not a big fan of LinkedIn. And I opened my account on LinkedIn in August 11th, I think it is, in 2003. So I think I'm getting to the end of where I don't really need to think about LinkedIn so much anymore. I've had enough. But it should be easy enough to try out these integrations, the mailing list, for example, and working with our own tools, eating the dog food, as I said. But there is a general overhaul needed to streamline our outreach. So having different accounts, things in different places, and so on, we should always have our primary point of publication. Or, as I don't know if I've talked about it here, but it's one expression is called POSSE, POS, publish on your own site or server. So POS, and then SE, syndicate elsewhere. So always make sure that we are the home base for our projects, our images, our videos, our conversations, our audio programs like this, and so on and so on. And we can push them to Spotify or YouTube and so on. So we want people to be able to find us, and then there should be useful information there when they get there. So if they find us on Spotify, but Spotify, for whatever reason, might cancel our account, not saying that's going to happen, but it has happened to me with other Spotify accounts. Luckily only once, but that's one too many. So we should always have our home base that we have some sort of control over. So that's what all this really is when you get right down to it. Finally, the last section, more progress, less aspiration. That's not as bad as it sounds. As I have mentioned a couple times, I would like to spend more time describing what we are doing and have done than what we are planning and hoping to do. This is a challenge in the near term if this is indeed a civic volunteer winter, which I maintain it is. That just means people aren't thinking civic volunteerism right now. They're thinking a host of other distractions. So at the moment, I'm wearing all the hats. So to me, feels like winter. While we can talk about plans and ideas in our initiative meetup once we start those up again early next year, it is not as useful to talk vaporware until we have a couple of things up and running. Once we do have a little bit of a track record, we'd say, well, here's what we're working on next. But it's hard to say, here's what we're working on next when we don't have, people can say, well, what have you actually done so far? And I would say, well, we have our GitHub pages. We have various things that are in different stages of not being useful yet. So too many hats. Ideally, the things that we can deploy or have done or be in a useful state will be attractive not only to the general population here in Greater Vegas, and maybe elsewhere, but more specifically interesting and even attractive to any aspirational civic volunteers here locally or at a distance who are thinking, hey, I would like to work on that. It's much more difficult to get people to sign on to work on something that you are describing. It's a little bit easier to show version 0.1, here's the idea, and have a complete set of user stories and a workflow and having all those pieces in place is basically the sort of the bare minimum right now. So that's fine. All those things are in various states of not ready yet, but that's the sort of stuff we need to clear up and get sorted. This is part of our overall plan in general, though, to collaborate at large, especially if the total addressable civic volunteer pool is still recovering from something of a refractory period after the Code for America sunsetting of the brigade program and a general reduction in the size of the pool of people who want to spend time on civic-oriented open source projects. Now, open source in general is also having that. There's some fatigue is setting in, a feeling of underappreciation. There's been some bickering and outright fighting. I think every once in a while people should step back and say, okay, well, maybe you got to change the scenery. You got to stop working on this for a while. That's the way it is. Civic volunteerism, just like anything that's done on a volunteer basis, especially in the open source world, has a practical human limit, a human factor that should be factored in. And every once in a while, you got to say, okay, well, you need to take a weekend, or you need to go step away from keyboard, as the saying goes, AFK. So get away from that keyboard and do something else for a while, and then come back and fix that bug. So that's, it's just me working on this stuff right now. So there's no rush. I'm not under the gun, as they say. I'm not under pressure, and that's by design. I don't really need to feel like I'm under pressure until we reach a point where we have multiple people, then we're trying to collaborate, whether here locally or just out in the world, on the internet and whatnot. If there's other people's time involved and we are collaborating proactively at that point, well, of course, you don't want to leave them hanging. I don't want them to leave me hanging, and so on. But for the moment, in this 2025 year-end Misc catch-up time interval, now is a good time to continue to not be too stressed, but to just get some stuff done. Stop talking about it. Just do it. If this were a athletic commercial, try not, do or do not. No, try not. There is no, do or do not. There is no try. Yeah. Frank Oz as Yoda. So on that note, I will leave off here and continue on those bits that all add up over time as a pile of technical or administrative debt, both actually in this case. And while these are all important that I've described here today, there is yet more to do still that I haven't talked about here. I've talked about them in previous episodes as aspirations, but we got to start doing that stuff. So we'll catch you next week with an update, or with updates. And on that note, bye.